Roger Bollenbacher, United States Army, Vietnam. Roger's one of my Americal Division Vietnam veterans. I interviewed him in Longmont, Colorado, April of 2007, along with Bruce Porter, Rod Lawrence, that you've seen already on this channel, and a few others. And Roger's perspective of Vietnam is very pure. It's very raw. The emotion reminds me of Ed Masterson's interview. You can see it in his eyes and hear it in his voice. He suffers from PTSD. He's been through combat, been through war, was drafted at a young age out of high school. He graduated in 1968. 2 years later, at 19, he was in Vietnam, 70 and 71 with the Americal Division. He started with the 4th Infantry Division, was wounded, and then transferred to the Americal Division, an infamous division if you study your history of World War II in Vietnam. But Roger has several Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star for his actions in Vietnam, and just one of my unsung heroes. I'm really happy to share his story with you. Like I said, he suffers from post-traumatic stress disorders, and folks, I tell you what, these stories are just golden. These opportunities to learn from our veterans, and that's what we need to do. We need to share these stories with others, help somebody that might be suffering from PTSD, maybe another Vietnam veteran. Years ago, when I produced my Vietnam Remembered documentary in 2007, just after these interviews with Roger and the others, the VA contacted me, and they bought, I think, 250 copies of that film, and they put them in all the VA outreach centers, the vet centers across the country, because they felt it had therapeutic value. Now listen, folks, that's powerful. I've never talked like this on this broadcast, but these stories do have therapeutic value, and it helped a lot of Vietnam veterans then and now, and still is helping them. I'm sure there's more than I'll ever know. But I thank God, there again, it's a ministry for me, giving honor to whom honor's due. An act of remembrance is an act of honor, and that's what I'm doing. And I'm glad for those of you that have stepped forward to help me. Michael Sarofsky, I want to thank you again. He's a Denver area native. I don't know if he's a native, but he lives in the Denver area. And Michael has stepped forward and now sponsoring a 3rd interview here, and a couple more after this. But Michael, thank you. It's great partnering with you, working with you. Thank you for helping me to share these stories and those that will benefit from Roger's story. It's a very powerful story, Michael. And I thank you for your dedication to my work, to our veterans, to our country. I know you've gone through a lot in your life, and you're at a time now where you're able to help others. And I just thank you for reaching out through me, through these stories, and helping a lot of people. So God bless you, Michael. Folks, if you'd like to sponsor a story like Michael, you've heard it before. The information's in the video description. Just click on the link. Go to my website, larrycapote.com. You can click on Sponsor a Vet at the top of the page. You'll see pictures of my veterans and just include their name in the sponsorship. Hearing from people around the world is really encouraging, very encouraging. God bless you all for doing that. If you want to donate to my work, there's information in the comment section. When you watch the video, you can comment during the video, after the video. The very first comment is one that I pin on the account, and you can read that, and there's a link there to donate. So, Voices of History Radio, I got to keep talking about it. I'm so excited. Every time I turn it on, I see somebody listening from another country. It's so cool, man. It's just so cool to have living history in the palm of my hands, in the palm of your hands. Download the apps free in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and you can go to larrycapote.com or listen to it there for free. And, you know, the Bible says, to whom much is given, much is required. You know, I have a great responsibility to give back, and I hope you do too, as you realize in your own life. So I thank you for those of you that have helped me with my work, and it is a ministry. You're helping me, and I believe there's fruit from this ministry, and many people are being helped, healed of all things, and just comforted through a lot of these stories, whether you're listening to the radio station or watching the YouTube video. So, okay, that's it for now. Thank you for watching, listening, subscribing to this channel, sharing these videos, and I'll be talking to you on another broadcast. And I'm so excited. Roger, God love you, and just thank you for sharing your story with me. I know it was difficult, and I hope those nightmares have ceased, brother, and that you found peace with God. Okay? Amen. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Tell me what year you went to Vietnam.
71.
And tell me the unit you're with over there.
I was with the Americal Division. I was with the 4th Division for the first 3 months, and then I got transferred, wounded and transferred to the Americal Division.
How old were you then?
I went over at 19.
Okay. So you're a young man, first time in combat. I mean, you're in Vietnam. What, did you enlist?
No.
Okay, you were drafted.
Yes.
What'd you think about that?
Well, I didn't appreciate getting drafted.
Yeah.
And I was pretty sure at that time I was going to Vietnam.
How'd you feel about that? Did you feel invincible, like, nothing can happen to me, or?
Unfortunately, in my case, when I went over, my brother had a serious accident while I was in basic training, AIT. And I said, I made a promise to God, I said, I'll die in Vietnam if you bring him out of this and save him. And when I got back, I just graduated IIT and got NOM orders. And when I got back to the hospital, he come out of a coma and recognized me.
All right.
And I stayed there for 2 weeks prior to going to NOM. And I didn't realize the promise I'd made until I got on the plane. And then I was scared. Because I knew I was going to die, but I didn't know how and when. And so for the first month in Vietnam, I was so scared I could hardly move. And then after I got out in the field and got wounded, after 3 days in the hospital, I realized that I couldn't live anymore like that. So I started in the new position with the new company that I was with, Americal. And the only way I could revive my self-esteem was to start walking point. And I continued until 3 days before I got out of Vietnam. I walked point over there.
So you're over there the first month, you're scared. I mean, how are the other guys around you? Are they scared too? I mean,
not so much as I was. You know, they had reality, they had a chance of getting through it, and I had, in reality, that I was never going to make it at all. So for sure, getting killed is a lot more chicken than what the other guys are.
So you're over there in Vietnam. The first time you got in country, what did you experience as far as the sights, the smells, the sounds? I mean, was it what you thought Vietnam would be as a country, the geography, or was it hot? I mean, what do you remember about the first time you set in country?
Well, when we flew in, we was on a C-130, and the airstrip was getting hit with mortars when we was coming down. Mm-hmm. And I thought, and then when we landed, got into dugouts, we watched a hill about a mile away getting bombarded with our aircraft, and they said they'd wiped out 2 squads over there. And I thought, man, if this is the way that every day is going to be for the rest of the time I'm here, it's going to be a son of a gun.
Yeah. So who are you fighting, the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese?
Yeah.
Both?
Both.
And you're walking point. Explain what that is to the layperson. What is that?
It's someone who goes down the trail and checks it out before anybody else goes through. Check for booby traps and try and watch for ambushes.
Is it like recon? Is that kind of what it is? Or?
Not really. Recon is completely different. Recon is just going out and checking an area out for, well, actually most of our orders that we got was going on reconning areas, see what the enemy activity was in them. So it was kind of all recon that we did.
This might be an obvious answer, but isn't that dangerous, walking point?
It's supposedly 3 or 4 times more dangerous than any other position.
So what prompted you to be put in that position, or were you put in there without your choice?
No, most of the time they try and keep it as a voluntary, unless nobody volunteers, then they force somebody to do it. 2 things caused me to do that. The way I acted in my first 3 months, I was afraid all the time. And the fact that they'd put the new guys in country on point and they wouldn't last 3 days. And I got tired of it because I knew I could get through the day a lot easier than they could.
So your mental state at the time of Vietnam, being over there, being in a war, in a conflict, I mean, walk me through a day. I mean, what would a normal day be as far as engaging the enemy? Did it become routine, or was it different every day?
It was different every day. Sometimes we'd get hit at night. Sometimes we'd walk into ambushes. A typical day over there would be getting up before dark and eating cold sea rations. Trying to have a hot cup of coffee if you had to hide the flame if you heated up coffee. Have a cigarette, and then we'd go on the trail. Most of the time over there I refused to walk trails because every time we walked one we either got hit or walked into booby traps. So I cut through the jungle 90% of the time I was over there.
So are you by yourself when you're walking point?
I'm up 40, 50, 60 feet ahead of everyone else.
So if you encounter some enemy, do you radio back, or how do they know?
By voice. They, if anything happens, they're within yelling distance. If anything happens, I tell everybody to go the other way.
So you've got an M16?
I've got an over and under I carried. It was an M79 underneath M16.
Did you ever see Forrest Gump?
Yeah.
Do you remember when they're in Vietnam and they're walking, but you know, they're kind of walking and spreading out, and is that reminiscent of anything of what it was like in just that little piece of that movie? I mean,
yeah, it was. When we were in the clear, we couldn't get within a certain distance of each other. When we was walking in the jungle on a trail, we kept 20 to 30 foot between each other in case somebody hit a booby trap. It wouldn't wipe everybody out, or if we got in an ambush even.
Did you use helicopters at all to go in and out of areas at all, or did I ask you that?
I had 16 hot CAs.
Combat assaults?
Yeah.
So take me on one of those, from getting on, loaded, en route, and then being inserted into an area or whatever you were doing.
We'd get a call for ambush on another squad or company, and we'd take a hot CA. I usually did the landing of the choppers, cleared a secure path and popped the smokes. And then everybody'd load up on the helicopters, and we'd take off and insert as close as we could to the action on the other side. Several times we got fired upon coming in and lost some guys coming in.
So tell me about it. I mean, you lost some guys getting off the chopper, or? In
flight and going down to land. They got hit by the gooks in the woods.
So you were on the helicopters and you guys were getting shot?
Yeah.
And you were with them?
Yeah.
So what do? Do you help them? Do you have a medic or what?
The ones that got shot usually go back. They don't land, or they don't get off when we land. They just go back and they take them back to the medevacs or the hospital. But there was quite a few times it was pretty hairy.
Can you tell me a little bit about one of those incidents? I mean, just describe it to me, what was happening and what you were doing and what was going on.
Well, we had probably the worst one I ever went in. We were up a quarter of a mile, and we was hearing the bullets hit the bottom of the chopper, and we did a quick, like a half U, and went down. The altitude, we went down fast, to say the least. And when we come in, our guys were in a clearing, and they were scattered all the way around the clearing, protecting that clearing. And when we come down, I was on the door hanging out, and the M60 gunners were firing on the way down, and I seen that the guy was still firing when we was coming into our own guys, and I reached back and pulled his gun up. Just as he probably got 2 foot from the first guy, he would have wiped out 3 guys of ours. He was watching the hills further up than where he was shooting, and he didn't see our guys were coming up. And I flipped his gun up just as it just fired over the top. Then he seen immediately what was going on. So, but we lost 2 guys in our chopper before we landed. They got hit, and I don't know how hard yet. And they never see them after they get hit. They go to the rear and go home. But we stayed in that position for half an hour after everybody was landed, and then moved into the woods and set up perimeters in there. And we had off and on 3 days of contact. And that was the hairiest probably of any of the missions we was on. But we lost 104 guys in those 3 days. And that was out of company. size.
Wow.
Well, it was 2 companies, actually.
So what's your rank at this time?
I went over as an E4, and I said I'll walk point if I get an E5.
Is that a sergeant or?
Yeah, sergeant's E5.
Okay.
And they give it to me.
Were you like over a platoon or a squad? Or?
No, just squad.
So you had a squad of men that you worked with?
Yeah.
Did you lose men from that squad too during your time over there?
In the remaining 9 months, we'd got new guys in off and on, but we lost probably nine people out of the squad I was in that got killed, and maybe 20, 25 that got wounded. But some of those come back to the field.
Why do you think you survived? I mean, you're around these guys that are getting hit. Why do you think you made it through?
That I can't answer because I was wounded. I was wounded 5 times over there. 7 times if you count just a little piece of the shrapnel hit me.
But you were able to come back to duty?
Yeah,
or?
it was nothing ever, any of it that was serious. And each time it could have been very, very serious.
Roger, define combat for me.
Combat? It's when the enemy and you get into throwing lead at each other, trying to kill each other.
What about the sound of combat? Tell me about how would you describe the sound of combat?
Sometimes when you get into combat, you don't hear anything. And maybe the start of it, you'll hear all the explosions and the rat-a-tat-tat of rifles. You can smell everything. And it just seems like it closes off and you concentrate so much on what you're doing that it's kind of oblivious to what's around you. And then when it's over and you sit back and think about it, and then it hits you hard. And you think of what could have been and what did happen, and it just like it climbs in your soul.
Is there fear during the combat?
There was on the first 3 times I had combat, and there's always fear of dying or getting hurt bad, but it lessens. The more you survive, the braver you get, so to speak. You think you're immortal or whatever. After you get so lucky so many times, you think nothing's going to happen. And that's when it's most dangerous, when you're in the country. It's when you think nothing can happen to you. You got to stay scared or you won't stay alive.
So when do you have your baptism under fire? When does the reality hit you that this is for real, man?
Exactly when it happens. You say, oh shit, I didn't know it'd be like this. And your boots are shaking. That first firefight, you don't do much. If it's close, you you keep your head on the ground, you go up and fire like this.
How close do you ever get to the enemy, like we are, or was it always farther than that?
You know, I bumped into a couple of them. Physically knocked one down. When I was running, he was running too. The only thing is, we ran towards each other. We had no idea that either one of us was around. And we knocked, both of us knocked on our butts.
So back in basic training, what are your thoughts towards combat someday? Are they preparing you for that? Are they preparing you to hate, to kill? I mean, and then when you get into combat, was your training good that you had?
No, you wish it had been a lot more. You wish you'd had another year of training. Because as rough as it was, physical conditioning was the most important thing. And then they tell you of the things that can get you killed. Try and avoid those. Or your training was to do things on orders immediately. If you had a good leader, then you was good. Only, unfortunately, I had a sergeant that we threatened to shoot each other 3 times while I was there. Because he was not a very good leader.
So in your estimation, based on your training and living in this country in Vietnam, why were we involved in Vietnam?
Well, I was told that we were there because of the missile crisis, that they could put missiles there and hit the United States and communist-controlled country. And I was also told that Johnson's plantation he owned over there, we was over there to protect it. So it's two completely different.
Sure. Did you feel like you had a strong purpose for fighting over there, or did you get disillusioned at times, or how did the other men feel?
I think most of the people that was over there didn't think we should be there, that we was doing enough good to stay there. They couldn't figure a reason for being there. And especially when the stuff hit the United States, that they all were against the war. And then that made us feel more like we shouldn't be there.
So were you hearing things back home of the protests?
A few things from letters only. They wouldn't, government kept everything quiet on us. Yeah. But your family write to you, why? Then you could come up a little bit with what was going on back there.
So when you're fighting over there, are you conscious of fighting for like God and country, or is it just a matter of survival?
We kept it as we was fighting for our country. That's the only way we could fight and kill people, is to think that we were doing it for our country. Otherwise, it would absolutely make no sense, and it would drive you literally insane.
Tell me a little bit about the Huey helicopter, what it was used for in Vietnam.
Mostly combat assaults, taking personnel back and forth from one place to another. And when he was in the rear, that's what we'd always go out on. Was very few times we walked out of camp, out of the hill. We'd get transferred up to 10 miles or so away from where we were at, our base camp.
Medevacs too?
Yeah, medevacs was the same.
Did you ever assist with the wounded at all during your time over there? Was there somebody else? Did you ever help anybody that was wounded?
Well, if we got any people in our unit got hit, we had a medic. Every squad had a medic in it. And a lot of times the medics couldn't get in to help them until they got them out of the fire area. So we had to carry them back to where a medic could treat them. And then when it was all over, we'd help put them on the choppers.
Are there any memories of any incidents where you were around anybody you knew, or that you could help somebody, or friends that maybe died while you were there, or anything like that? Or was that stuff that...
Several of them, several times of things like that. But I remember one time we was walking down a trail, and it was all rooted up across the trail. We was on the flatlands. And I really didn't think anything about it, because we'd had 4 or 5 spots like this. And I walked down through the center of it. Second guy made it through that area. The third guy made it through, and the medic was the 4th guy. And he hit a Petnam can, and it blew his leg off past the knee. And it threw the first 2 guys in front of him down, and 2 guys behind him. And luckily, they got minor wounds out of it. But I walked through it, and didn't even dawn on me that they had booby trap in that area. It just looked like wild hogs had rooted it up. That was one of the big mistakes I made. I made 2 other ones while I was there. I walked through booby traps that it didn't kill the people, but it maimed them for life. And that's some of the things that were very hard for me to live with after I got back. I kept questioning myself, did I save anything, or did I do a job better than somebody else could have? But we had a lot of, you've seen death and mutilated bodies in every shape, every way imaginable. And a lot of them weren't imaginable.
Are these memories that are still vivid in your mind, or is it a fading memory that you just would rather forget about?
And unfortunately, it's like it happened yesterday. 99% of Vietnam is like I was there yesterday. As a matter of fact, up until about a month ago, they finally found some pills for me to take that made my nightmares easier to take. They didn't hit me as hard. But sometimes I'd go 30 to 60 days every night of nightmares. And after that, you get pretty well worn down.
Just things about Vietnam that happened to you?
Things that happen in Vietnam, people getting killed, that you know.
Do you suffer with post-traumatic stress?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. I've talked to a lot of guys.
And I think you'll find everyone that was over there has some degree of it.
Were you guys rotated in and out of Vietnam as individuals? You weren't as units, right?
Yeah, it was as individuals.
I heard that was maybe one of the reasons there have been problems too, versus like today they're trying to have them go over as units, like in World War II and Korea. But
I think that would have been a lot better if you had somebody you went there with and came back with, because that builds a lot of tight bonds.
How did Vietnam in the military change you as a person?
Well, when I graduated, I was voted the shyest guy in the whole class. And when I come back, and I looked at the bullies in our class, and I said, you know, I'm not that weak punk I used to be, and I challenged them. And when I come back, I was completely different, completely opposite personality, all the way around. Aggressive. I was never aggressive. Matter of fact, I never laid a hand on anyone physically before Vietnam. I would have never thought about doing it unless it was a threat to my family. And afterwards, it didn't bother me any. If somebody wanted trouble, which I still stayed out of fighting with people more or less, but I was more aggressive, a lot more.
You think war just in general would change anybody in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, even today? Was there anything different or unique about Vietnam, you think, or particular challenges that you guys faced that maybe other people haven't? Or
I think we faced a big challenge of the people not being on our side when we come back. And they were name-calling us, you know, baby killers, spitting on us. We didn't have the glory that any other war has had. There was so much hate about Vietnam veterans that we were the cowards for going. The heroes stayed home.
Well, where do you think that came from? The news media, or what shaped that perception?
I don't know. I really have no idea what started all of it, what turned our society against us. But I know it was 22 years, 6 months, 3 days, and 12 hours after I got back that somebody congratulated or told me thanks for going to Vietnam. That's a long time to live with something you're ashamed of, or to be ashamed of something you've done that you thought was the highlight of what you do in your lifetime.
What was the most difficult thing that you had to do in Vietnam during the time you were there, as far as being out on patrol and all the things that you encountered? Was there a more difficult task or event that happened to you that was in your mind that you think of, or was it all bad?
I would say 75% of Vietnam was bad. The worst thing you had to do is when you had to pull a trigger on someone or throw a hand grenade at somebody. That and seeing your own men wounded and killed. Those two things were... No one wants to experience those in a lifetime.
So, like, when did you have time to really kind of wind down or really think about what happened? At night? Was night the time for that?
Night was the time we did that, and we'd set up ponchos real tight to where no light could get out of them. We'd sit in, smoke cigarettes, and cook food. And that's when you talked. There was like 3 people in a bunker. And that's when you could communicate with each other in a low tone and kind of relax. But the time I was there, we were back in a so-called fairly secure area on a hill where they had the mortars and everything set up and hot food. We were back, I was there 4 times, 3 days in the year that I was there. We got 4 3-day sprints back on the hills. The rest of the time we was in the bush.
You hear things about Vietnam, Roger. What about drug usage? Was that prominent in maybe the area you were at, or was that a problem over there?
My outfit did drugs when we were on the hill. You do them the first day and straighten out the second and third day and drink beer. You might hit marijuana and heroin cocaine the first day he was there. And then you would go down to just smoking pot and having beers for the second 2 days to clear up. If you didn't want to go back in the field, you stayed on hard drugs and stayed screwed up, and they'd keep you in the rear. A lot of people got too afraid to go back into the mountains. We wouldn't want them there anyway, but they'd get messed up on drugs, so they'd have to stay back. I had people that got scared in the woods, and they ended up shooting themselves. And matter of fact, I was just laid down one night, and wasn't 5 minutes, a bullet went through my top of my poncho liner, about that far off of my stomach. And the medic shot himself and then hit himself up with all the, well, what do you call it? It's the pain medicine we carried. Anyhow, he had 5 vials. He hit himself up with morphine and then shot himself in the stomach. Just to get out of the field, he was scared.
And as far as coming home, did you have, obviously you didn't have a homecoming, but was it a bad experience when you came home? Or did you just go back to your family and there was no protesting at the airport or wherever you were at, or was there some stuff going on?
No, there was no protesting when I come home. My family met me at the airport, and actually there was another guy in my class that come home prior to that, about 3 or 4 days, and we had a weekend party that weekend. And I just turned 21. So we had a 3-day party when I come home, and which really made me feel good. My class threw it up at a lake, and we had a ball for 3 months, or 3 days. But the reality, it didn't take less. It took less than 2 weeks for what the mood was back there against Vietnam veterans. You just heard too much of it. Every time anything was said about Vietnam, it was negative.
So you're in country one day, the next day you're home, and then you have to transition back into civilian life? I mean, how were those first few days, weeks, or months after you got home?
I jumped up in the middle of the night a lot. I woke up thinking I was there. Matter of fact, that lasted for a very long time. But it was just, you can't believe that you was shedding blood 4 days before that, and then come back into a reality of the peacefulness that was around. I guess it was actually too peaceful too quick was a big problem. If we'd had some kind of a way of graduating out of the hell into the reality of home, it should have been a week, at least a week's process in that, because it was too much shock. It was too big of a shock to the system.
So who did you talk to that time? Did you talk to anybody about it, or did you find yourself closed within yourself?
I pretty well stayed to myself with everything that was going on about it, because of the way everyone felt about it. You couldn't feel that you could talk to somebody because of their negative attitudes about it already. And then to tell them that you was having problems, we just would reconfirm everything they thought about it. So you kind of tried to handle your own problems.
So did you go back to school or back to work, or what happened when you came home?
I actually went back to work. I went back and signed up to go to work, and they put me on layoff status. And I think it was 2 weeks I got back to work, which was about right.
Did you think about your buddies that were still over in Vietnam?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote to everyone I knew there until they got out, which most of them had less than, I think the longest was 6 months. The shortest was just a month.
Did you ever been back to the Vietnam Wall in Washington?
No, the closest I got to that was that we came to Longmont a few years back, and I went to it and walked to the wall, and then I had to leave. I couldn't stay there. My wife, she understood, I guess.
Would you ever want to go to Washington and see the wall?
Oh, definitely. I would love to.
Would you?
I've had friends that's gone there and brought back pictures of it.
Are there particular men that you're thinking of, names that you want to find?
Yeah.
Were they buddies in boot camp or what?
He overseas.
Yeah.
The ones that I'd come in contact over there with and got to be really good friends with. There's 9 of them that I would like to look up. The only thing is, I threw everything away from Vietnam that I ever had, and I think their addresses and their names were in that, but most of them I remember.
Why do you think you wanted to talk to me today? Did you see the article in the paper? Or?
I did, and well, my wife did, and she told me about it, and it was just in a mood where I thought, you know, I'd like to do something like this to, I think it would help me personally to tell some of the things that happened to me over there and the way I felt about it afterwards. I've had a couple opportunities before this and I refused them. And I thought, well, it's time that I try something like this.
I've talked to a lot of Vietnam veterans who pretty much said the same thing that you have, and a lot of them say it really helped them to talk about it. So hopefully that'll help today too, and as you would see this at a later time too, the whole thing. But what else, just, I'm not going to belabor this, but just as far as combat, being in Vietnam, a young man fighting for your country, and the things that happened to you, is there anything else about combat or the engagements or particular patrols or combat assaults that you went on that maybe you could tell me for the camera? Is a specific story maybe that comes to mind? You know, maybe just describe what was happening, where you were. I'm kind of intrigued by your walking point. I mean, trying to imagine what you're doing. You find something, you know, everybody opens up on fire, there's a line. I mean, you attack. I mean, what kind of, you know, warfare are you engaged in then? Just guerrilla warfare, sniper fire?
It's guerrilla warfare. They've been in the jungle for 20 years and we're just passing through. So they've got all the advantages and they know, they can tell where somebody's at. Everybody, all the time you're in the jungle, they know where you're at. And you have no idea if they're around the next tree or not. When I walk point, a lot of times I'd come upon booby traps on top of hills mostly. Or where another path was taken off from that, where they had their hooches set up. One time in particular when I was walking point was kind of more amazing than the rest of the time. We was in an area that nobody'd been in for 11 months. And they wanted us to go in and check this area out. We took a squad in from 2 different directions. And this area consisted of probably 10,000 acres of heavy jungle. We was walking through elephant grass. I was pushing through elephant grass, and mid-afternoon, 2 o'clock, I was pushing through elephant grass as usual, and instead of like walking a trail, I told you I don't do that unless we have to. I was pushing, and all at once the elephant grass, solid thick, gave way, and I fell forward and I rolled about 2 times around. And I got up, took my rifle to shoot, and they had cleared underneath the canopy about 5 acres and had hooches, training grounds for sappers, the whole thing. There wasn't a blade of grass except for the trees in that whole area. Everything had been completely cleared away. But the canopy was there, and you could not hardly see the sky yet. We had caught them. We had AK-47 rifles. We'd collected 12 of those. Ammo, TICOMs. We completely surprised the heck out of them. They had just cleared the area before I pushed through the grass, because I didn't see any movement any place. And for them to leave their weapons, you almost had to kill one to get his weapon. But they had taken off that quick without their weapons. And needless to say, we went in, checked everything out, and then not all of them cleared out. There's some of them went into the holes under the hooches. And we went in 3 different holes, and we were getting pretty well banged up by doing it. So we ended up just throwing hand grenades into the rest of the holes. And then we moved out of the area, and then we called in artillery on it. And then gunships came in and completely wiped about 2,000 acres off the map. But that was probably the closest I ever come to meeting my maker that day.
Well, what's the Americal division? Why are they called Americal? Is that a division of the Army, or what is that exactly?
It's a division of the Army. It's like the 4th Division and anything else. It's just a name of a company. They all have their wars that they've been through and the campaigns that they've been through, campaign ribbons, and each company tries to outdo another company as far as their bravery and their citations that they get, unit citations. But
tell me about any air support you had and how effective it was in the battles and the fighting over there.
Well, we had artillery all the time that we'd call in any place from different hills. But the air support, we called in Cobras, and we had a little plane called Puff that was everybody's hero. They had mounted quad 50s on the each side of it, and it was just a lot of fun to watch that work. Of course, we had the jets that came in with the fugas, and they dropped bombs. If we ever got into any real, especially it was out in the open, if we got hit by any size, like the hills got hit, we could bring in air support that would do a job on them. That would really say it was 10-to-1 to begin with, it'd be 1-to-1 by the time they were done. Saved our bacon a lot of times.
Talking about napalm. Well, tell me what napalm is and what it was used for.
Napalm's a hot burning gas that when you throw it over an area, it gets so intense so quick that it'll pretty well kill anything it's around. We put we had napalm over there probably 40, 50 times that they'd hit the valleys with. It was just an all-around good weapon that was on our side. It was a terrible way to kill the enemy, but it saved a lot of American lives in the long run. And that's what it was all about.
What about Agent Orange? What is it and what it was used for?
Well, unfortunately, I was in the Agent Orange area. You put Agent Orange on a jungle and the jungle wilts in 3 days. It turns everything black. It kills everything that's there. The areas that they put Agent Orange on, unfortunately, we walked through the jungle a day after they did it. And a lot of our guys ended up with Agent Orange, the sores on their bodies and that thing. And I don't know if they ever proved it, but a lot of the guys had children that were deformed from it. But it was bad. It was the worst vegetation killer that man's ever come up with. It's devastating to anything that lives.
You mentioned Puff. You're talking about Puff the Magic Dragon?
Mm-hmm.
Was that just one gunship, or was that a whole bunch of gunships?
Well, it was a plane.
Plane.
It was like a C-130 plane that, it wasn't a C-130. I don't even know what it was. It was a prop plane that they, all they did was go back and forth. If one was firing, the other one would be loading. And I don't know if they had more than 2 of them or not, but one would unload, fire in an area while the other one reloaded and come back. And they just, one night we watched them all night. And they had tracers on every 5th bullet, and it was just a spiral, continual spiral down to the...
When you're in Vietnam, are you counting down the days till you go home?
Oh, yeah.
You have like a calendar, or what do you...
Everybody knows the exact day that they come home. how many days you short. That was the thing you lived for, was your countdown numbers. You get down to the last 60, you're short. You make fun of the guys that's over 300 yet. And you can see, it's amazing to me that you see a picture of a guy when he first gets in Vietnam, and a picture of a guy that's been in combat for the year. And you swear to God that they were 20 years older. He turned out from that little school kid, graduated from high school, into a man that's looks like he's lived an entire lifetime in 1 year. You can see it in their faces.
What do you think people should remember about Vietnam, Roger?
What should you remember about Vietnam? Nothing should split a country as this war did. And we got to be more careful in the wars we get into and make sure that there's a reason for us to be there. Because there's anyone that has to fight in a war shouldn't have to do it just because it's some politician wants them to do it. America should be very, very protective of the wars it gets in.
As a veteran and a citizen of the country, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom means that we can live our lives without communist domination and somebody telling us what we can and cannot do. That we can live our lives and try for the happiness that all men should be equal to. For me, freedom was hard fought and hard earned. And it gives me the feeling that no man has a right to tell me that take a voting capabilities away or how to live. As long as you don't hurt your neighbor and you help your fellow man, I can't see anything else better than that in America.
How about the flag? What does the American flag mean and represent to you?
It's an emblem about our way of life, the American way of life, and our freedoms. It's the flag is what this country has fought for, and its freedoms all through every war we've been in. It's to keep the people that continually dominate and control other people in their countries and kill them because they don't like the way they are. It's kept that kind of idealism out of this country and protected our way of life. It's just a symbol of our freedom and who we as Americans are.
Without getting real into the nightmares, but do you have nightmares about the buddies that you lost, or just being in Vietnam, or things that never really happened to you, but just the memories of being over there or something? Or
actually, it's a combination of all that. There is nights that I can see everyone that was friends that I lost over there. Were nights that we had attacks on us. Some nights I had bad dreams about not being able to fire my weapon when I'm getting attacked. Or a lot of times my dreams consist of getting completely surrounded in all four directions by the enemy. And they're getting into close to where it's time to die. They get so intense that I wake up sweating and think that I'm right there. In the reality of the 3 seconds before you know where you're at and what's going on. It's like being awake for a week after you have these nightmares. Completely drains you. Your mental capacity is shot. You're just completely wasted after one of these, mentally and physically.
So when you're actually in combat and somebody's hit, wounded, or whatever, did you ever personally get to help anybody with anything, or was it just always the medic, or did you ever get to help somebody?
Oh, yeah, I think everybody over there helped somebody one time or another, stop bleeding, tie tourniquets on, give pain pills, or, I mean, the shots, the morphine. Everybody carries one shot of morphine with them. And if these people are incapacitated to where they can't get the morphine, you get it out for them, give it to them. A lot of times you use your own. When others get hit, you use yours too. And then wait for a resupply of morphine. But yeah, I've held people until they died several times.
People that you knew, or just other people in the units, or?
3 of the guys I knew that I held, said their last words and said their goodbyes. Some of them, or one of them was bad enough that he was unconscious when he passed away. But 2 of them I told me to tell their parents that they loved them. One had a wife, he said tell her he loved her. He even had a daughter, a 1-year-old daughter. Things like that are very tough.
Are you a praying man, a religious man? Did you pray for these guys, or what? I mean?
I definitely did. While I was over there, I was more religious than any other time in my life, of course. But I honestly thought that after I started walking point, that the only thing that did save me, was keep me going, was God. 'Cause I greeted him in the morning and said goodnight to him.
So when you're walking point, you're tipping everybody else off that there's enemy ahead or something like that? Is that kind of what you're doing, or?
Anytime I feel that there's anything going on, we change directions, go someplace else, and go around that area. Very few times we've ended up walking into anything. But there were enough times it was enough. If I got the feeling that, it seemed like you got a feeling after you walked point for a while of what was going to happen and when and where, and you just got a feeling for the jungle. You could tell by the birds quiet. When it got silent, it wasn't a good thing. You know that something was going to happen. You could tell by the look of areas if there was potential for an ambush, booby traps. You pretty well knew 95% of the time what was going to happen before it happened, and you could avoid them that way. That's the reason I did it, because the new guys coming into country there, they had no idea about anything. So many of them walked through booby traps and ambushes that it cost us more than just their lives when that happened.
Well, I think it'd be a scary job, that's all I can say. I mean, the courage to do something like that, and the adrenaline or whatever, just always on your toes, and your senses are probably at the heightened state, and for everything you hear and see and the feelings.
It was, but it was the only way I could walk on with my life, was to do that at that time, because of what the prior things of being afraid and being a coward. Yeah, I couldn't die being a coward. That would be worse than death itself.
Are there sights, sounds, and smells today that bring back Vietnam?
Yeah, the sounds. 4th of July is a real bad time. There's things that you hear, watch on TV. In 1,000 ways, there's 1,000 things in a week's time that'll remind you of combat overseas. Sometimes your own mind just skips for no reason into Vietnam and thinking about it. I've been afraid at one time when I was driving. Have an eerie feeling that you're just like walking down a trail into a booby trap. You know something's going to hit the fan pretty soon. And it's not a good thing to be living by like that.
Were you married during Vietnam? You weren't, were you?
No.
How long you guys been married?
18 years? 19 years. Coming up 20.
Does she understand you? I mean, as far as what you've been through?
She does, but she gets tired of it. She's, I don't know how many hundred times she's told me, why don't you start living come home from Vietnam.
And you said it was how many years before someone thanked you?
22.
Do people in the last 10 years thank you? I mean, do they?
Well, in the last 10 years, they've come up with this Thank a Vet from Vietnam. And they've had special picnics, that kind of thing around, welcome home a vet. And everybody'd shake everybody's hand then.
How does that make you feel?
It didn't make me feel as good as I thought it would, because it's a forced recognition. I always wanted to march in a parade, and I joined the color guard. And my first parade, I was really proud. That first time I got to march in front of people carrying a flag, I have to say that was very proud for me. And then I've done it so many times since that it's begun to be a pain. No, I've always been, we go for the funerals of fallen veterans, and I've always had a deep respect for what the color guard did, give them their last salute. And I've always thought it a great honor to do that.
Are you proud that you're a Vietnam veteran?
No. If I knew that my life was going to be like this, I'd took the 5 years in jail. Because the heroes stayed home in Vietnam, or so most of my friends thought. No, there's absolutely no way in hell I'd have went to Vietnam if I'd realized 50% of what would happen afterwards.
Do you think a lot of vets suffer like you do, or do you think some are okay? I mean, as far as...
Very few of them are okay. I think every vet has some kind of pain from war. Because every one of them, if anybody, I'll say 100% of the Vietnam veterans that had combat have got some bad feelings about Vietnam, and a lot of pain out there. There's a lot of veterans right now from Vietnam that still cannot cope with life, cannot live day to day on it. There's a lot of them that's 100% disabled just from the shock of Vietnam and the terror of it.
Just in a moment, just what to summarize Vietnam in the era, the 60s, what was unique about it that maybe caused a lot of this? I mean, Vietnam has its own little, it seems like it's taken out of history and put over here because of a lot of the things that happened. Do you think there was anything uniquely different than World War II or Korea or even today?
I doubt if there was. Big thing about Vietnam was what caused a lot of problems was the Lieutenant Callies. It got publicized so much that it led everybody to believe that we were a bunch of murdering rapists over there. And of course all these college kids and their freedom and everything, you know, live and help your fellow man live, well, that completely hit them wrong. And college kids were always wanting something to protest about. And unfortunately, a lot of them took this up. Probably 95% of the colleges took this anti-Vietnam campaign. And that hurt us severely, to know the country wasn't backing you anymore. When you're fighting for your country and your country's not behind you, it can be one of the hardest things in combat. But it was just a bad rap that we got for being Vietnam veterans. It got to be an unpopular thing. And I think it was mostly what started it was the story of like Lieutenant Calley and that kind of thing.
Well, I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. At the end of the interviews, I always ask the veteran to give me a salute from where they're seated. Could you do that for me in the camera, into the camera when I tell you?
Okay.
Okay, Roger, right into the camera. Go ahead. Great, thank you.